My mother's Thanksgiving dinner, with the whole family gathered around her table for the first time in 2 years. My 16-year-old granddaughter grabbed my sleeve near the back hallway and pulled me away from the noise. Her face was the color of the November sky outside, drained and pale, and she pressed her phone into my hands without saying a single word. I thought she wanted to show me a funny video. I thought she was being a teenager. I was wrong about everything. My name is Gerald, and I am 67 years old. I have lived in Nashville, Tennessee my whole life, raised 2 children in this city, buried my wife here 11 years ago, and thought I understood my family. What I am about to tell you happened on a Thursday afternoon in late November, in a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and roasting turkey, in a house where my mother had lived for 41 years. Tell me where you are right now. What time is it there? Drop it in the comments. I want to know who's with me as I take you back to that hallway. My mother, Dorothy, turned 74 that October. She was not a frail woman. She grew her own tomatoes. She drove herself to church every Sunday, to the grocery store twice a week, and to her book club on alternating Wednesdays where she'd held the same seat for 19 years. When her sister passed 18 months before and left her the house on Elm Ridge Drive, a property worth somewhere near $490,000 and a savings account carrying just under $1,000,000, nobody in the family said much about it. We were grieving. We were glad Mom was provided for. My daughter Renee and her husband Patrick said all the right things. Patrick especially. He was an accountant, which made him feel indispensable at every family conversation involving money. He had a habit of leaning forward with his elbows on his knees whenever the subject of finances came up, nodding slowly like he was absorbing information the rest of us weren't capable of processing. At Thanksgiving, I watched him from across the living room, and something in the back of my mind registered the look on his face, not the warm look of a man enjoying his family, but the measuring look of a man doing arithmetic. Renee kept refilling Mom's wine glass before it was empty. I noticed that too. I told myself I was being uncharitable. My granddaughter Sophie was 16 that year. She was Renee's daughter from her first marriage, which meant Patrick was her stepfather, which meant she occupied a particular kind of invisible position in that household, old enough to hear things, young enough to be underestimated, close enough to the edges of conversations to catch what fell off them. Sophie and I had always been close. She called me Papa Gerald. She was the kind of teenager who still wanted to sit next to you at the table. When she pulled me into the back hallway near the linen closet, she didn't speak right away. She handed me her phone and pointed at the screen with a shaking finger. It was an email thread. The subject line read, "Dorothy Full Service Planning, Timeline Q1." I almost handed the phone back. I thought it was something mundane: insurance forms, a financial planner, something Patrick had organized. The man organized everything. Then I read the first line. Per our conversation, we can move forward with the cognitive assessment as early as December 15th. Dr. Harlan is available for home visits, and his reports have held up in 12 prior guardianship filings without legal challenge. My thumb scrolled before my brain caught up. The Elm Ridge property should clear without issue given the valuation. Liquidation timeline of 30-45 days post-placement. We recommend Sunrise Meadows on Old Hickory private, limited outside visitor access, and the staff has worked with our firm before. Sophie was watching my face. She had her arms wrapped around herself the way she did when she was 9, and had come to tell me she'd broken something and was bracing for the reaction. I kept reading. The email chain went back 7 months. 7 months of correspondence between Patrick and a man named Clifford Hale, who operated a company called Family Futures Consulting out of a post office box in Brentwood. The emails mapped out a plan in the same tone you'd use to plan a kitchen renovation. Get Dorothy to sign updated insurance documents she had. Get a cooperating physician to conduct a cognitive evaluation framed as a routine wellness check scheduled for December 15th. File for emergency guardianship based on that evaluation. Hale's network included 2 attorneys who specialized in uncontested filings. Move Dorothy to Sunrise Meadows. Sell the Elm Ridge house. Transfer the savings account. In one email, Renee herself had written, "She trusts Gerald more than any of us. We need to make sure he doesn't get involved until it's done." I read that sentence 3 times. My daughter had written about me like I was an obstacle. Papa Gerald. Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. I found it by accident. Patrick left his email open on the kitchen laptop last week, and I was going to use it for homework, and I saw the subject line, and I read it, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't sleep for 4 days. I didn't know if you'd believe me. How long have you known? 5 days. I kept opening it and closing it. I kept thinking I was reading it wrong. You're not reading it wrong. Her eyes filled. They're my mom and Patrick. I kept thinking maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it's something else. I looked at my granddaughter, 16 years old, carrying this alone for 5 days, coming to Thanksgiving dinner knowing what she knew, watching her mother refill her grandmother's wine glass, watching Patrick lean forward with his elbows on his knees. She hadn't said anything because she was hoping she was wrong, and she told me because she had decided she couldn't stay wrong on purpose any longer. "You did the right thing," I said, even though my voice came out strange and flat. I squeezed her shoulder. "This is not your fault, and you did exactly the right thing. Now I need you to go back out there and act like nothing happened. Can you do that?" She wiped her face carefully. "Yes. Good. I need 5 minutes." I locked myself in the downstairs bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub. Through the wall, I could hear the muffled noise of the family, my mother laughing at something, the television in the den, the sounds of a normal Thanksgiving, Patrick's voice, warm and carrying, saying something that made Renee laugh. I called my attorney. It went to voicemail. I called my friend Ray, who had been a civil court judge for 22 years before he retired. He answered on the third ring. I talked fast. He listened without interrupting, which was something Ray had always been good at. When I finished, he said, "This is elder financial abuse and fraud, Gerald. If those emails are real, this is a felony, multiple felonies. You need to forward those emails to yourself right now, and you need to call Adult Protective Services tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight. What about the doctor? The December 15th appointment? Get your mother to cancel it. But don't tell her why yet, not at the table, not with Patrick in the house. Get her alone first. I need more than 5 minutes." "I know, but you need to go back out there. Don't let them know you know. The worst thing you can do right now is tip them off." I stood up, looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, 67 years old, and my hands were shaking the same way Sophie's had. I forwarded the entire email chain to myself. Then I went back to Thanksgiving dinner. The next 40 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat at my mother's table and watched Patrick carve the turkey with the casual confidence of a man who believed everything was going according to schedule. Renee arranged rolls in a basket and asked Mom if she needed more sweet tea. Sophie sat across from me and kept her eyes on her plate. Occasionally she would glance up and I would give her the smallest nod and she would look back down. Mom sat at the head of the table in the chair she'd sat in since before I was born. She wore the blue cardigan she kept for holidays. She looked perfectly, completely, entirely herself, sharp and warm and present, telling a story about her book club's argument over the November selection with the timing of someone who'd been making people laugh her whole life. She was not confused. She was not declining. She was Dorothy Marsh, and she was fine, and my daughter and her husband had spent 7 months engineering a paper trail to make the world believe otherwise. Patrick caught my eye once across the table and smiled. I smiled back. It was the hardest thing I'd done in years. After dinner, while Renee and Patrick were cleaning up and Sophie was helping carry dishes, I asked Mom if she wanted to take a walk. Just the two of us, down to the end of the block and back. We used to do it when I was a boy. She looked pleased and got her coat. The November air was cold and still. We walked half a block before I said anything. "Mom, do you remember signing some insurance documents a few months ago? Patrick brought them by." She glanced at me sideways. "The Medicare update forms? Back in August?" I kept my voice even. "Did you read them?" She was quiet for a moment. Patrick explained them. Said it was just updating the coverage information. "Did you read them yourself?" Another pause. Longer this time. He had them all flagged for signatures. It was a lot of paperwork. She stopped walking. "Gerald, what is this about?" I told her everything. Standing on the sidewalk in front of the Hendersons' house with the streetlight coming on, I told my 74-year-old mother what her daughter and son-in-law had spent 7 months planning. I told her about Clifford Hale and Family Futures Consulting. I told her about Dr. Harlan and the December 15th appointment. I told her about Sunrise Meadows and the liquidation timeline. I told her that Sophie was the one who found it. She didn't cry. My mother has never been a woman who cried easily. She gripped my arm with both hands and went completely still, and I watched her face move through shock and then a terrible clarity, the look of a woman rapidly rearranging everything she understood about her life. She said, "Those Medicare forms weren't Medicare forms." "No," she said. "They gave me control of my own finances to Renee. Power of attorney, yes. Medical and financial." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "She's my daughter. I taught that girl how to make biscuits." "I know. She taught Sophie how to braid her hair." "I know, Mom." She straightened. Her grip on my arm changed, tightened, became something different. Not leaning, anchoring. "Call whoever you need to call," she said. "Tonight. All of it. We walked back to the house. Patrick and Renee were still in the kitchen. Sophie was in the living room watching television with the sound low. When she saw our faces coming through the door, she stood up. "I'm calling Adult Protective Services," I told Sophie quietly. "And the police. I need you to stay near Grandma Dorothy tonight. Don't let Patrick or your mom give her anything, any drink, any food she hasn't watched come straight out of the kitchen. Can you do that?" Sophie stood up straight. She looked older than 16 just then. "Yes." "Good." I went to the den, closed the door, and made the calls. The APS officer I spoke to was a woman named Carol Simmons. She had the voice of someone who had heard variations of this story before and was not surprised by any of it, which was the most chilling part of the phone call. She asked for the email chain, which I sent while we talked. She asked about the December 15th appointment, about Clifford Hale, about Sunrise Meadows. She said she was contacting the Financial Crimes Unit and that officers would be at the house within the hour. She said, "Mr. Marsh, does your mother have a safe place to stay tonight? She's in her own house. I mean, if we need to remove the other parties. Is there someone who can stay with her? I'll stay." "Good. Don't mention the calls. Keep everything calm until officers arrive." I went back to the living room. Mom was sitting in her chair and Sophie had moved to the couch next to her, close enough that their arms touched. Patrick was washing dishes. Renee was wrapping leftovers in foil, humming something to herself. I sat down and pretended to watch television for 45 minutes. When the knock came at the door, Patrick answered it. He had the natural reflexes of a host, opening the door before anyone else could move. He found 2 plainclothes officers on the porch and a marked patrol car at the curb. And for just a moment, one long, crystalline moment, his face went completely blank. Then the performance started. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" Patrick Drummond. Officer Diana Reeves stepped inside. "My partner and I need to speak with you and Renee Drummond regarding a complaint filed this evening." Renee appeared from the kitchen. Her face went through the same stages Patrick's had, just half a second behind. "Complaint? What complaint?" "Gerald." Patrick looked at me and I watched him arrive at the understanding. Something shifted in his expression. Not guilt, exactly, but recalculation. "I can explain this." "Gerald, if you let me explain." "Officers," I said. "My mother is in the living room, Dorothy Marsh. She's the complainant." Mom stood up from her chair. She was 5'2" and 74 years old, and she looked at her daughter across the living room with an expression I will never forget for as long as I live. Not rage. Something quieter and more permanent than rage. Renee's voice came out small. "Mom, you planned this for 7 months," Mom said. She didn't raise her voice. "While I sat at this table and trusted you, you were planning to take my house and put me somewhere and tell the world I wasn't capable." Her voice stayed entirely steady. "Do you understand what you've done?" Renee started crying. Patrick reached for her arm. I was watching Patrick's hand move toward his jacket pocket, and I said, "Officer," when I said, "He has a phone." I watched Reeves' partner step forward and ask Patrick to keep his hands visible. The second officer found the phone. On it, a text to Clifford Hale sent 11 minutes earlier. "Problem, abort December timeline." Patrick was placed under arrest in my mother's living room while the turkey carcass sat on the kitchen counter, and the leftover rolls were still wrapped in foil on the stovetop. Renee was arrested moments later, still crying, still saying "Mom" in that small voice, like repetition might change something. Sophie sat on the couch next to my mother the entire time and did not look away. When the patrol cars pulled out of the driveway, the house was very quiet. Mom sat back down in her chair, the blue cardigan, the Thanksgiving dishes in the rack, the normal world rearranged. Sophie sat beside her and took her hand without saying anything. I called Ray back. Then I called my attorney. Then I sat down on the couch and stared at the wall for a while. The investigation that followed revealed that Clifford Hale had run Family Futures Consulting for 6 years. His network had operated in 4 states. He had a cooperating physician, Dr. Gary Harlan, who had filed fraudulent cognitive assessments in at least 9 prior cases, 9 families, 9 elderly people who had trusted the wrong people at the wrong moment. Hale's firm charged a 15% commission on all assets recovered, which he called, in his own intake documents, a family transition fee. There were 14 other families in the Tennessee case files. Mom revoked the power of attorney documents the following week with a different attorney, one she chose herself, whose office was not connected to anyone in Hale's network. The December 15th appointment with Dr. Harlan was canceled. The Elmridge house stayed exactly where it was. 2 months after Thanksgiving, I drove to a nursing facility in Madison called Whispering Pines to meet a woman named June Calloway. She was 78 years old, a retired librarian, and she had been a resident of Whispering Pines for 14 months. Her son had filed for emergency guardianship using a Harlan assessment. Her house had been sold. Her savings were gone. She was sitting in a chair near the window when we arrived, Mom and Sophie and I. She was wearing a cardigan not unlike my mother's. When I introduced myself and told her why we were there, she looked at me for a long moment like she was deciding whether to believe that this was real. Then she said, "I asked for my library card last month. They told me I didn't need it anymore. I'm going to need you to tell me everything," I said. She told us everything. June was the first. Over the next 3 months, we found 6 more people connected to Harlan's assessments, all of them sharp, all of them wrongly placed, all of them waiting in rooms they had not chosen in buildings. They could not leave while their assets were managed by people they had once trusted. Sophie built a spreadsheet on her laptop. She color-coded it by legal status. She updated it every night after school and brought it to meetings with the attorneys working the case pro bono. At 17, she was already talking about pre-law. She said to me once, driving home from a case meeting, "Papa Gerald, I almost didn't show you that email. I sat on it for 5 days." I know. What if I hadn't? You did. But what if I hadn't? I looked at her across the car. Then your grandmother would have had a very different Thanksgiving this year, and December, and the rest of her life. But you did show me. That's what happened. You were 16 years old and you saw something wrong and you chose not to look away from it. She was quiet for the rest of the drive. In April, a federal grand jury indicted Clifford Hale on 14 counts of elder financial fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Dr. Gary Harlan surrendered his medical license and pled guilty to 9 counts of filing fraudulent medical assessments. His sentencing was scheduled for June. Patrick Drummond and Renee Drummond were tried separately from Hale. Renee's attorney argued she had been manipulated by Patrick, that she had not fully understood the scope of the plan. The jury did not agree. She received 8 years. Patrick received 14. I was in the courtroom for both sentencings. Sophie sat beside me. Mom sat on my other side in a navy dress she had chosen herself, in a courthouse she had driven herself to, parked herself, walked herself into. When the judge read Patrick's sentence, I watched his face. He looked at Renee. He did not look at Sophie. He did not look at Mom. He looked at me once, briefly, and I held his gaze until he looked away. Clifford Hale's sentencing came 6 weeks later, 22 years in federal prison. His attorney called the sentence disproportionate. The judge said, "You operated a criminal enterprise that treated elderly Americans as inventory. The sentence is proportionate to exactly that." Hale was 56 years old. He would be 78 when he was released, the same age as June Calloway sitting in Whispering Pines with no library card. The irony was not lost on anyone in that courtroom. By summer, we had helped free 4 of the 7 people we'd identified. June Calloway moved into an independent living community she selected from a brochure. She sent my mother a card with a bookmark inside from a library sale. Mom put it on her refrigerator. Mom still lives on Elmridge Drive. She still drives herself to church. She still grows tomatoes. She hosted book club in June, the first meeting she'd held at her house in 2 years. She served lemon bars, and everybody stayed 2 hours longer than scheduled. Sophie starts college next fall. She wants to study elder law. She says it because she means it, not because it sounds good. She comes over on Sunday afternoons sometimes and sits with Mom in the garden, while Mom shows her which tomatoes are ready. They don't talk about Thanksgiving very much. They don't need to. Renee has written me 3 letters from the facility where she's serving her sentence. I've answered 2 of them. The 3rd one is still on my desk. I don't know yet what I want to say. I tell you this story not because it ended cleanly, because it didn't. I tell it because it almost didn't end at all, because a 16-year-old girl sat with a secret for 5 days that would have buried her grandmother, and she chose to hand me a phone in a hallway instead of pretending she hadn't seen. Here is what I know now that I didn't know then. When someone suddenly becomes very interested in your paperwork, your finances, your doctor's appointments, your memory, when they start framing ordinary forgetfulness as decline, when they show up with documents that need signing and explanations that feel too smooth, pay attention. Read everything yourself. Call a lawyer you choose, not one they recommend. And if someone you trust comes to you with something they are afraid to say, stop what you are doing and listen. The documents Mom signed in August were not Medicare updates. They were the first step in a 7-month plan. And the only reason that plan failed was because one person in that house was paying attention. Not me, Sophie. I have told this story because there are Dorothys in every state, in every city, sitting in rooms they didn't choose while someone manages the life they built. There are people right now writing emails with subject lines like full service planning, timeline Q1, and most of them will never be caught because no one in the family was standing at the right doorway at the right moment. If this story sounds familiar, if something in it landed in a place that feels specific, please share it. Not for this channel, for the person in your life who might need to hear it. And if you are young, and you see something that doesn't sit right, and you are afraid that nobody will believe you, or that the cost of saying something is too high, I promise you it is not too high. Sophie thought she was just a teenager with a phone. She was the only thing standing between her grandmother and the rest of her life. Some things are worth saying out loud.